Among the green fields of Roman Britain, at the end of the 4th century, a boy was born who would forever change the history of Ireland. His name was Maewyn Succat, but the world would come to know him as Saint Patrick. Raised in a Christian family, he was the son of Calpurnius, a deacon and Roman official, and the grandson of a priest. Although raised in the Christian faith, his childhood was marked by a certain religious indifference. Like many young people, Patrick did not show great fervor for his faith. The peaceful and comfortable life in his homeland did not offer significant spiritual challenges, and his relationship with God was still superficial. However, when he was 16, a tragic event changed his destiny forever. A group of Irish pirates raided his village, kidnapping him along with many other young people. Sold as a slave in Ireland, Patrick was forced to work as a shepherd in the cold, mountainous lands of the north. Isolated and suffering from hunger and cold, he began to turn to God. In the solitude of the hills, among the sheep, his heart opened itself to prayer. He began to pray incessantly, sometimes more than 100 times a day, as he himself recounts in his work, Confession. It was there, among the Celtic pagans, that Patrick had his first deep experience with God. He understood that his trial was not a punishment, but a call to conversion. His heart, once indifferent, began to burn with love for Christ, and he found strength in faith to endure his suffering. After 6 years of captivity, a vision revealed to him that his freedom was near. In a dream, God showed him a ship ready to take him back to his native land. With courage, Patrick fled from his master and traveled many miles to the coast, where he found the ship that would lead him to freedom. After a difficult journey, he arrived in Gaul and finally in Britain. His return was met with great joy by his family, who had never lost hope of seeing him again. But Patrick was no longer the same young man who had been captured. His heart now belonged entirely to God. Despite the relief of being free, he could not forget Ireland and its people. The cold nights on the hills still echoed in his soul, and the faces of the pagans who did not know Christ appeared in his prayers. Then a new vision brought him an even greater calling. In a dream, he saw a man named Victoricus bringing him a letter entitled The Voice of the Irish. Upon opening it, he heard the cry of the Celtic people, "We beg you, come walk among us again." These words touched his heart deeply. Although his family wanted him to stay, Patrick knew that God was calling him to a greater mission. He left for Gaul, where he would prepare for the priesthood and for the mission entrusted to him. At the school of Auxerre, under the guidance of Saint Germanus, Patrick grew in wisdom and holiness. During his years of formation, Patrick studied the Holy Scripture, Christian doctrine, and ecclesiastical discipline in depth. He also learned about Irish culture, understanding the customs and language of the people he would one day evangelize. His missionary desire grew day by day, but God was still preparing him. Patrick understood that evangelizing Ireland would not be an easy task. The Celtic people were deeply attached to their pagan beliefs and to the Druids, the priests who dominated the region's spirituality. After his ordination to the priesthood, he continued to devote himself to God's service, but his great mission had yet to begin. Another missionary, Palladius, was sent before him to evangelize Ireland, but his mission encountered difficulties and failed. When Palladius died, Patrick was finally chosen for the mission he had so eagerly awaited. Pope Celestine I, recognizing his zeal and love for the Irish people, named him bishop and gave him his blessing to depart. Arriving in Ireland around 432, Patrick found a people who were resistant but thirsty for truth. His approach was wise. Instead of imposing the faith, he sought dialogue with the tribal leaders, respecting their culture while introducing them to Christ. Patrick understood that, to convert Ireland, he would first need to win over its kings and local chieftains. He traveled among the tribes, speaking of Christ with humility and power, always trusting in God's grace to open hearts. One of the most decisive moments of his mission took place at Tara, where the High King of Ireland, Laogaire, ruled. It was the seat of Druidic power, and to challenge that authority was a great risk for Patrick. On the eve of the Easter feast, Patrick lit a large fire on the top of the Hill of Slain, defying Druidic tradition that forbade any flame before the royal celebration at Tara. The king was furious and summoned Patrick to explain himself. Before the king and the Druids, Patrick boldly proclaimed the message of Christ. He used a three-leaf shamrock to explain the mystery of the Holy Trinity, teaching that God is one in three persons: Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Impressed by Patrick's courage and wisdom, King Laogaire allowed him to continue preaching. Although he did not convert, he recognized the missionary's spiritual authority and did not prevent him from evangelizing his people. From that moment on, Patrick began winning the hearts of the Irish. With patience and fervor, he traveled throughout the island, preaching, baptizing, and building churches. His love for the Irish people was evident in his every action. Little by little, the old pagan cults were abandoned, and Christianity began to take root in Irish culture. Patrick not only converted individuals, but also formed disciples, preparing future priests and bishops. He knew that to consolidate the Christian faith in Ireland, he needed a well-structured church. Thus, he founded monasteries, which became centers of evangelization and spiritual formation, ensuring the continuity of the faith. Many miracles were attributed to Patrick, which further increased the impact of his preaching. It is said that he drove all the snakes out of Ireland, symbolizing Christ's victory over evil and paganism. But his greatest work was not physical miracles. Rather, it was the spiritual transformation of an entire people. From a pagan land dominated by the Druids, Ireland became a fervently Christian nation thanks to Patrick's tireless work. As evangelization progressed, Patrick realized that his mission could not rely solely on his preaching. He needed to ensure that the Christian faith was rooted in the culture and structure of Irish society, so that it could endure for generations. To that end, he began to establish dioceses and appoint bishops, forming a solid ecclesiastical hierarchy. These spiritual leaders would ensure that the gospel continued to be preached even after his death. Monasteries played a fundamental role in consolidating Christianity in Ireland. Patrick understood that monasticism was essential for preserving faith, culture, and Christian education. Inspired by the example of the monastic communities of Gaul and Britain, he encouraged the founding of monasteries throughout the island. These religious centers became true beacons of spirituality and knowledge. Monks not only dedicated themselves to prayer and ascetic living, but also copied manuscripts and taught the scriptures. This made Ireland one of the greatest centers of Christian culture in medieval Europe. Patrick did not hesitate to challenge the Druids, who still held great influence over the people. He understood that to convert Ireland, he needed to show the superiority of the Christian faith over pagan beliefs. It is said that on several occasions, the Druids tried to defeat him with their rituals and sorcery, but Patrick, with his prayer and trust in God, always emerged victorious, demonstrating the power of the gospel. One of the most famous episodes occurred when a Druid tried to curse him in front of a king. Patrick prayed, and the man dropped dead at that very moment, terrifying those who opposed the Christian faith. Although he used strong words against paganism, Patrick never imposed his faith by force. He won hearts through the example of holiness, his love for the people, and the power of truth. On his travels, Patrick baptized crowds and taught Christian doctrine in a simple way so that everyone could understand. His use of the shamrock to explain the Holy Trinity became a symbol of faith in Ireland. In addition to preaching, he encouraged Christians to live the gospel authentically, abandoning ancient practices that went against God's commandments. Respect for human dignity became one of the pillars of the new Christian society. Many tribes converted completely, and some of the kings themselves accepted Christianity, allowing the church to grow even more quickly. The conversion of Ireland was a unique phenomenon, as it occurred without great conflicts or bloodshed. Patrick was also concerned about those most in need. He freed slaves whenever possible, remembering the suffering he himself had endured during his captivity. In his letters, he vehemently denounced the slave trade, condemning those who captured Christians to sell them. He raised his voice against injustice, defending the oppressed. He was tireless in his mission. He traveled all over the island, crossing forests and mountains, facing dangers and challenges to bring Christ's message to every corner of Ireland. His zeal was accompanied by great humility. Even as a bishop, Patrick never sought honors or riches. He lived simply, wholly dedicated to the service of God and the people. He often spent nights in prayer, interceding for the conversion of the Irish. His life of deep spirituality inspired those who followed him, leading many to desire holiness. The Christian faith began to transform Irish culture. Pagan customs were gradually replaced by Christian traditions, and the people's morals began to reflect the teachings of Christ. Love and forgiveness, previously considered signs of weakness, came to be seen as virtues. The notion of justice was reformulated in light of the gospel, promoting a more humane and peaceful society. Patrick also helped develop a code of Christian laws for Ireland, guiding tribal leaders on administering justice in a way more aligned with Christian principles. His impact was not limited to Ireland alone. The new faith strengthened ties with other Christian nations, bringing the island closer to Western Christendom and paving the way for its great influence in the centuries that followed. Over time, his disciples began spreading the faith beyond the Irish borders. Many Irish missionaries, trained by Patrick and his successors, would bring Christianity to other peoples of Europe. Among these missionaries were notable figures like St. Columbanus and St. Brendan, who continued the work of evangelization inspired by Patrick's example. Ireland, once an isolated pagan territory, became a center of Christian spirituality and learning. Centuries later, it would be called the Island of Saints and Scholars, due to Patrick's lasting influence. His work, however, was not without suffering. Patrick faced persecution and slander, both from pagan enemies and from some members of the church itself who did not understand his mission. In his Confession, he speaks of the difficulties he faced and the injustices he suffered. But he never became discouraged, for he knew that his mission came from God and not from men. Even in the face of trials, he never abandoned his people. His love for the Irish ran deep, and he was willing to give his life for them if necessary. He was fully aware that his strength came from divine grace. In his prayers, he acknowledged his own smallness and thanked God for having been chosen for such a great mission. Humility and obedience were hallmarks of his life. He never sought personal glory. Instead, he always pointed to Christ, who was the true Savior of Ireland. His legacy began to take shape even in his lifetime, and the Christian faith spread throughout the island, forever changing the history of the Irish people. As the years went by, Patrick began to feel the weight of age. His body no longer had the same strength as before, but his spirit remained unshaken. He continued his mission with the same zeal as in his youth. Aware that his time on earth was drawing to a close, he devoted even more time to prayer and meditation. He sought solitude to be alone with God, strengthening himself spiritually for his passage to eternity. Even in old age, he did not distance himself from his people. He continued to travel throughout Ireland, preaching, baptizing, and strengthening the faith of those who had converted. His presence was always received with great joy. The Irish saw in Patrick a true spiritual father. His love for the people was so profound that he considered himself a servant of every man, woman, and child he baptized. In his letters, Patrick expressed his gratitude to God for having been chosen for such a great mission. Despite the difficulties, he never regretted dedicating his life to the evangelization of Ireland. He also left important writings that would serve as a testament to his life and mission. His confession is one of the most precious works for understanding his spirituality and his relationship with God. In this work, Patrick reveals his humility and acknowledges that, without divine grace, he would have accomplished nothing. He saw himself only as an instrument in God's hands, a faithful servant of Christ. Another important text attributed to him is the letter to Coroticus, in which he vehemently condemns slavery and defends the freedom of Christians captured by British pirates. His words show his concern for justice and the value of human dignity, making him one of the first Christian leaders to firmly oppose slavery. Over time, Patrick realized that the church in Ireland was well established. The bishops and monks he had trained were prepared to continue his work after his departure. He then decided to retire to a more isolated place, where he could prepare himself spiritually for his definitive encounter with God. He chose the region of Downpatrick as his final refuge. There, he spent his last years in deep prayer and penance, living simply and offering his sufferings for the conversion of all Ireland. Tradition tells us that, in his final moments, Patrick was visited by an angel who revealed to him that his mission on earth was complete. He accepted his death with serenity and trust. On March 17th, around the year 461, St. Patrick departed for eternity. His death was deeply felt throughout Ireland, which considered him its greatest saint and spiritual father. His funeral was attended by crowds, and his grave in Downpatrick became a place of pilgrimage, where the faithful went to seek inspiration and strength in faith. But his mission did not end with his death. On the contrary, his influence continued to grow over the centuries, and his figure became a symbol of Irish Christian identity. The monasteries and churches he founded flourished and became centers of spirituality and knowledge. The Christian faith took such deep root in Irish culture that it could never be uprooted. During the Middle Ages, Irish monks, heirs to the tradition of St. Patrick, carried Christianity to various parts of Europe, especially to Scotland, France, and Germany. Ireland, once a pagan land, became one of the greatest centers of evangelization in the West, sending missionaries to strengthen the Christian faith in times of crisis. St. Patrick is also remembered for his devotion to the Holy Trinity. The shamrock, which he used to explain this mystery, became an emblem of Irish Christianity. His feast, celebrated on the day of his death, March 17th, became one of Ireland's most important religious celebrations. Over time, St. Patrick's Day began to be celebrated worldwide. Initially, the feast was a strictly religious occasion, marked by masses and processions in honor of the saint. Over the centuries, it also became a symbol of Irish culture. Today, St. Patrick's Day is celebrated in various countries, especially where there are Irish communities. Parades, music, and festivities mark the date, commemorating the legacy of the great evangelizer of Ireland. Despite modern celebrations, the true meaning of St. Patrick's Day cannot be forgotten. It is a moment to recall his mission and his love for the Christian faith. His influence transcended the borders of Ireland. As patron of the country, St. Patrick is invoked by millions of faithful around the world who seek his intercession. Many miracles are attributed to his intercession, and his figure continues to inspire Christians to live with greater fervor and commitment to the gospel. His devotions spread beyond the Catholic Church. Even among Christians of other denominations, St. Patrick is respected as a great missionary and saint. In the 20th century, Pope John Paul II visited Ireland and recalled the importance of St. Patrick for the country's Christian identity. encouraging the faithful to follow his example of holiness. Even today, pilgrims visit his tomb in Downpatrick, where they find consolation and renew their faith, following in the footsteps of the one who brought Christ to Ireland. The prayer known as the breastplate of St. Patrick, also called the lorica, is one of the most beautiful expressions of his spirituality. In it, he calls on Christ's protection over every area of life. This hymn of trust and surrender to God is still prayed by many faithful, especially those who seek strength against temptations and spiritual dangers. The spiritual heritage left by St. Patrick remains alive, for his work was not just a historical achievement, but a true spiritual revolution that continues to bear fruit. In modern times, when so many turn away from the faith, his example is an invitation for everyone to return to God with sincerity and fervor. Today's Ireland, despite the difficulties faced by the Church, still bears St. Patrick's mark in its soul. His memory is a call to conversion and perseverance in the faith. St. Patrick teaches us that no obstacle is too great for those who trust in God. His story proves that the gospel can transform even the most resistant nations. The legacy of St. Patrick lives on, not only in Ireland, but throughout the Christian world. His example of faith, courage, and dedication to evangelization continues to inspire missionaries, priests, and lay people to this day. In a time when secularization is advancing and the Christian faith is being challenged, St. Patrick's testimony reminds us of the power of prayer and trust in God in the face of difficulties. His story shows us that no one is beyond God's grace. He himself was a young man, indifferent to the faith, but God called him at the right moment and transformed his life for a grand mission. Just as Patrick was taken from his homeland and sent to a foreign people, many Christians today are called to bear witness to their faith in hostile environments, facing persecution and challenges. St. Patrick's missionary spirit remains a model for the Church. His approach of respecting the local culture while firmly proclaiming the truth is an example of how to evangelize without imposing, yet without compromising the faith. He teaches us that evangelization is not just about preaching words, but also about living the gospel authentically. His life of prayer, humility, and sacrifice were the greatest testimonies of his faith. In times of uncertainty and spiritual crisis, St. Patrick's breastplate prayer resonates even more powerfully, reminding us that Christ is always with us and protects us in every circumstance. St. Patrick's Day, often reduced to cultural festivities, should be a time of spiritual renewal for all Christians, recalling the commitment to bring Christ to the world. His example calls us to trust in divine providence and never fear the challenges of the faith. Just as he faced kings and druids, we too are called to defend the truth with courage and love. Today, St. Patrick continues to intercede for the Irish people and for all who invoke his protection. His legacy remains a beacon of hope, guiding us on the path of holiness and the Christian mission.